It is 11 a.m. and time to start live critique. Um, this live critique happens every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is now. Ideally, what I would like this live critique to be is a critique of current work, of works in progress or recently completed work of anyone who would like to submit work for critique. This is turning out to not be the case because I'm not getting very many submissions. I have enjoyed critiquing those of you that have submitted your work, and I invite anybody to submit work to dabbleon@gmail.com if you would like feedback, if you would like critique, a couple images, and if you would like specific, like a paragraph telling me what you would like me to focus on, if anything. I love doing it. I love talking about artwork, so I'm going to be here regardless. I will always find something to talk about. There's a lot of artwork out there for me to discuss and to talk about. So I will be here regardless, and hopefully this is helpful to you all. And I'm glad you're here. A couple of things that I wanted to mention here before I get started on the critique today. I have a mixed media class starting next Monday. Registration has been open for the past 5-6 days, and tonight at midnight is the deadline. You cannot register past tonight at midnight. So take a look. All the details, all the information about the class is at dabbleon, DABBLEON, dabbleon.com, which is my website. In the past, I've mentioned that I'm trying to put together critique groups. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. My initial idea was not, I guess I'm not sure exactly how that's going to come together. If you are interested in being part of a critique group, it would be online. I have a short survey at dabbleon.com. Up at the top of the page, there's a little menu bar item that says critique groups. Click on that and you can fill out a survey. It would be either a weekly or twice monthly small group of 5 to 8 people. And critique groups are just a fantastic way to get feedback on what you're working on, to get encouragement, inspiration, have accountability to people, and just is a really nice way to connect with other artists. So if you're interested in this, please go to dabbleon.com and click on the Crit Groups menu item up at the top. So that's it. Register now for Mixed Media. Mixed Media is a class, 5-week class. All experience levels are welcome. Demonstrations and instruction will be on Mondays via Zoom, and then critiques on Fridays. And then there's a private Facebook group for discussion, continued discussion, and feedback throughout the week. And figurative or representational and abstract work, welcome. So today, if I can get thee to the internet. All right, I'm going to switch my camera over here. Today, actually, before I get to that, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go back to this camera, and I'm going to check in on Facebook. And it looks like I've got one person, one eyeball. Whoever you are, thanks for being here. And now back to the internet. Okay, so today I don't have a submission from somebody to critique, but I was going through some images on Instagram. Basically, I went and typed in hashtag portrait painting because there's some things about portrait painting that I thought might be interesting to talk about here in this context. But as I was scrolling down through portrait painting, I came upon these things. These 6 paintings. And as is often the case with Facebook here, we just get a square thumbnail of the painting, but just scrolling through them, the description is written in Russian, I believe. So I don't have any other information or legible to me information about these paintings. Um, and they are just kind of nasty paintings. Nasty, I don't mean that in I don't mean that in necessarily a negative way. What I mean is that the paint application is drippy, viscous, kind of rough, splattery. There's kind of a I don't care, rude aggressiveness about the paint application here. Kind of, it's not nearly as nice as Jackson Pollock, who is just kind of dripping and flipping paint around, more gestural, more like a dance. This feels more aggressive in the way the paint is applied. Anyway, I was looking at these and just enjoying them for how aggressive and the color palette is really dissonant. Lots of colors that don't quite mesh. They're not. They're kind of sickly colors, like the associations I have with these kind of green and yellow greens are a little bit more morbid. There's this high contrast. Anyway, these are kind of dark, emotional, aggressive paintings. And when I talk to friends and family that aren't into art, and kind of the stereotypical conversation with a non-artist would be like, well, my kid could do that. Or, sometimes as artists, we think our palettes look better than the paintings because they're more kind of confident, aggressive, assertive, colorful, those types of things. Or, like, is this really art? Or, I don't know. There's all these questions about the validity or the importance or value of paintings that are abstract and of this nature. And I want to recommend to you, if you're here and you don't appreciate this kind of painting, um, to to kind of silence those voices, those critical voices for a second. I just love that there's a human being out on the planet somewhere, maybe somewhere in Russia, that's throwing around paint like this. That's really getting into it. Um, its value in terms of art history, in terms of contributing to our progress as a human species, not really important in this case. Um, but I think just the emotion. There's a human being out there throwing paint around, and I don't know. There's something about that feels very human, very and brings me a certain amount of joy. Um, Also, it's just this kind of paint style is in your face. It kind of like it just challenges you to ask those questions. Am I art? Do you care? Is this important? Or just kind of explodes at you. It's more, I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to say I like that it's there, and would invite you to silence those initial voices of blah and just appreciate that there's a human being behind these paintings. But I thought it might be worthwhile today to talk a little bit about these paintings, just in terms of kind of the critique, just a more practical critique of them and what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and maybe give some suggestions on how they might be improved to engage more people. I brought them all into Photoshop. I don't think I'm going to be discussing all of them today, but thought it might be worth kind of switching through them and taking a look. So let's start with. I wanted to start with. I just got to choose. I'm not entirely sure. Okay, let's start with this one. So all of these The way that the paint is being applied is very chaotic. The visual information is fairly evenly distributed throughout the whole picture plane, the whole composition. We have dots, lines, splashes, and when there's this kind of chaos and there's not a very clear sense of a primary focal point or a dominant shape or something that really locks us in, that overall, when we just kind of consume it all as one thing, one experience, one whole mass of noise, of stuff. The word I've heard used for that is crystallographic balance, meaning that we don't really have, look at that. My computer decided to zoom in on that. Um, it's not really symmetry or asymmetry. It's just kind of a single visual experience. We kind of consume it all at once. That's not entirely true here. It's not perhaps totally crystallographic balance, but that's kind of the feeling I get with all of these. I find my eye not really wanting to lock in on one thing per se, but it kind of roams around freely without kind of locking in on one place. I am noticing on all of these that there is a fairly consistent line that happens. Hopefully you can see this right here. It's not really at the half point, nor is it at the third, which would be kind of down here. It's kind of in between half and third. And I could dig deeper into that and find exactly what that is. But I just find that interesting that we do tend to, each of us individually, tend to have default behaviors. We tend to have places where we tend to like to put things, whether that be in our home or visually in how we organize elements in a composition. So I see this line right here, and if I go over here, let's see, I don't see actually that line here, but I do see a strong line here in the middle, and then, down here. It seems like I remember seeing that kind of, yeah, kind of somewhere right below midpoint and above the third. No, these are in the middle. So there is kind of a strong middle line. This one, same thing, kind of right below midpoint and above the third. There's perhaps a consistent, yeah, so kind of in that area, like middle ground between middle of the composition, the center axis, and the third, the line of the third. There's also a consistent angle on that line that's kind of angling upward, which makes me think that this person might be right-handed. And that's another thing just to point out. Part of these default behaviors are dictated just by our body, the mechanics of how our arms move and our hands move. When we're right-handed, we tend to hold our brush just the way our wrist moves. When we're trying to make a straight horizontal line, usually we're going to pull slightly up just because that's kind of how our shoulder and arm muscles go. It's a little bit more difficult to pull it straight across perfectly horizontal. There tends to be a little bit of an elevation on the right side. That would be obviously the exact opposite if we were left-handed pulling from right to left. Anyway, so we're given some kind of indications about the person here. I'm assuming right-handed, but I might be wrong about that. The next thing that I want to do here is just let's go and pull out all the color information, all the saturation, turn this into black and white, and see what's happening. So remember, value contrast, light and dark contrast, is responsible for, it's a very potent kind of contrast to us as human beings. We really lock in on that. So areas that are extreme contrast, extreme light, extreme dark, white and black, essentially, on the value scale, putting those two values together is going to grab our attention a lot. So I'm seeing a lot of value contrast. Well, I'm seeing it mostly over here where you've got these white splotches next to, there's not really a black splotch that they're next to, kind of mid grays. And then these darker values are over here on the right side. So again, kind of evenly distributed value information. There's not really a point that I really am drawn to as a point of high contrast, as a primary event In terms of when we're talking abstraction, I tend to think of things in terms of events or some kind of loose narrative of kind of a story of things happening, and then there's this primary event that happens. In this case, I'm not getting that from value contrast. I am getting maybe a little bit of a sense of focal point in terms of size. So these splotches, they got this big red splotch here. Maybe I'm gonna make that a little bit more obvious. These, like this red splotch right here, and then these little punctuations of this saturated yellow grab my attention. And then, of course, we already talked about these white splotches over here kind of grab attention. So there is that kind of jumping around between points. Remember, points, we think of focal point, right? A point or a dot is a visual element that naturally kind of locks us in, right? A line creates a narrative or some kind of sense of duration. We follow a line. With a point, it locks us in on that one spot of the composition. And the repetition or pattern of points will give us a way to kind of jump around and find that, find some way of traveling and starting to find a pattern or meaning. That's kind of what we're trying to do when we look at art. So if I were going to make this stronger, one thing that I might want to do, and Photoshop and digital tools are really good for this. Let's see. I don't want a ratio at all. Okay, clear. Clear is what I want. Okay. So digital tools are good for this. They allow us to make crops, experiment with cropping the image. And in this case, we might find that there is a much stronger composition hidden within this composition. So let's give that a try. And I'm going to just drag from the corner here. And our rule of thirds lines are going to help us maybe find a stronger composition or a stronger geometry to use to organize the elements of our composition. And in this case, the elements are color, line, spot, or point. So ways of kind of creating a more compelling organization of those objects. So that line that's kind of in between the third and the half, maybe I'd want to see if it looks better on the third. Maybe even going in really close to make that, so that dot of red, that's kind of a strong shape. And then we've got this little red drip that happens right over here. Now this is starting to get a little bit more interesting to me. I'm going to put that dot of red right on the third, the intersection of the top third and the right third. And put if I can here, let's see. I'm going to put that line down at the bottom on the bottom third. Hopefully you can kind of see that. Now I'm going to hit this, hit crop here. Now if I zoom in here, then look at how this progression of, I should keep an original so we can go back and forth, but I'm not going to do that right now. So we've got this red spot right there, and then we've got these three yellow dots. And having them occupy a larger portion of the composition makes them stronger elements, right? They don't get lost in all the noise. They occupy more of the space. And because of that, they stand out more. And now we have something a little bit more concrete to lock in on in terms of creating pattern and movement throughout the image. This red dot becomes more meaningful. And because we have three yellow and one red, that red becomes kind of an anomaly. So we kind of have this interplay between there being three of one thing and only one of another. And that kind of creates maybe a narrative element or some kind of narrative dynamic. The geometry being invoked here or tied into is more interesting with the thirds than kind of in between half and third. And I think this is just already a more compelling composition. What I'm going to do now is go over to the Dodge tool, which is a tool that kind of refers to the days of uh, editing in the darkroom, different darkroom techniques. But what that's going to do is going to allow me to make this lighter. And let me see if I can, let's see, midtones. So what if I'm just going to go, this is perhaps not the best way to go about it. Nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to choose instead to go to paintbrush. I'm going to change this to, no, not a multiply layer. Maybe I'll do that in a second. Okay, so now how could I strengthen this even further? I kind of, because of the size of this dot and because it's anomalous compared to these other three yellow dots, I kind of want it to be the focal point. It is calling to me. It kind of feels like it ought to be the focal point. Right now, it gets a little bit lost in all the chaos around behind it. So what I might try to do is maybe lighten. Actually, what I'm going to do here is use a selection tool here and go back here to the lasso tool. Okay, so I'm going to just select this area right there, and I'm going to hide the selection line so we can watch this happen without the dancing ants there, or the marching ants to confuse us. Okay, so let's try. I've just isolated that red dot, and now I'm adjusting the levels to make it lighter. Whoop. Actually, what if I turn that into just a white dot? I like with a little bit of pink in there. Okay, still not liking that. That's not the look I'm going for. I kind of just want this to be a more saturated and lighter version of that red that's already there. Let's see, I still have that selection going. So I'm going to use the paintbrush to fill in that shape, and then I will mess around perhaps with the layer style here. Hang with me for a second. No, you know what I did? I did not put that on a different layer. That is what I did wrong. So let me do this. Okay, y'all. Thanks for your patience. I'm going to do that again, except for I'm going to put that on a separate layer so I can change the layer style. So that gives me a little bit more freedom to experiment with how that's interacting with the layer below it. Look at that. Okay. I'm going to go with that so we can see some of the detail of the paintbrush below. Okay. So now that red is starting to stand out a little bit more. And then maybe I can take the burn tool, which is going to make things darker, and and select everything except for the dot. And I'm going to turn that selection off so you can see what I'm doing. And then maybe make this area behind it darker, and that could be done with like a glaze. And you see how this is, I'm not sure if I'm a fan of that. Let's go to midtones. And see how that just starts to help make that red pop out, right? Next thing that I'm going to do. So I just darkened the background so there's more value contrast now between the red and the background. And then the last thing that I'm going to do here is just come in here with the Dodge tool and see if I can make these yellow spots a little bit lighter. Mm. Make these yellow. See, the dodge tool is not acting how I want it to act. So instead of doing that, let's do this. So this is a blunter solution here. But just by making these yellow dots a little bit more saturated and lighter value, they they start to get highlighted a little bit more. So that to me starts to feel like it is invoking some more narrative. It gives me something easier to latch onto, patterns that are more apparent, that I can follow and travel around the image. There's more of a balance between unity and variety. And I still have all of that wonderful, expressive, dramatic paint application to enjoy as well. So this gives me, I think, an image composition that's a little bit more accessible and not quite as overwhelming in terms of just throwing a ton of visual information at me. And if I were to back out of that and go back, I don't know if I can, let me go to, I don't have enough steps to go back to the original. But what if we did, okay, so that's the original image. And that's the original. And this is what I just did. Anyway, so just some ideas on how you can take a composition like this and refine it, crop it down, and pull some parts out and emphasize, de-emphasize to create a composition that's not quite so chaotic. It's a little bit more accessible and then helps us kind of engage and jump around the composition. There is, so a lot of artists will create a composition no matter what the medium, whether it's collage or paint or whatever, whatever, starting with a rigid idea of what that composition is going to be. So, say it's a portrait. I'm going to put the face right here in the middle. I'm going to have the body turned this way. I'm going to put this in the background. And they kind of plan out the composition or how the elements of the composition are arranged pretty rigidly beforehand with preparatory sketches or with just kind of a first initial laying out of the composition. Another kind of another way to approach composition that I don't think gets enough attention is to figure out composition after the fact. So, kind of what this artist has done with what I just did added onto it. So, not thinking about composition, just enjoying playing with paint, playing with shapes, colors on perhaps a large surface. And then after you've made all the mess, coming in and isolating parts of that mess into stronger compositions that are more visually compelling or just visually stronger. And I think that's a totally valid way to go about making artwork and relieves you from the stress of having to come up with the composition before you even start applying paint. It also is a way to approach art making where you just put stuff out there and then you have something to respond to instead of just having to lock and commit to a composition just starting with the plain white surface. So there's actually, I think there's something important to be learned here. And I think a lot of us don't start making artwork because we're so uptight and worried about doing something wrong and not getting that composition right from the start and worrying that we're going to end up at the end of the making this painting having shot ourselves in the foot at the beginning of the painting because we didn't get the composition right. So just a different way to approach art making that I think is can be a very powerful and very productive one, kind of depending on what you're doing and what your personality is. I think that's. I wanted to do one more here, one more example. These are so. I just didn't. So I'm kind of all over the place. I'm in a little giggly mood today. Um, you go to art museums, and especially now with contemporary art museums, if you go around the world, I've been to quite a few different countries and gone to major, the major art museums in different cities. And there's kind of a usual cast of characters. These museums, I mean, there's kind of a pantheon of famous artists over the century or over the years that, and museums tend to want to collect those famous artists. Anyway, you tend to get, especially kind of in the contemporary wing, you tend to get the usual cast of characters. And seeing these paintings reminds me that no matter where I'm at in the world, when I go into the contemporary wing, inevitably I'll run into a Philip Guston painting. And whether it's his more figurative, kind of cartoony paintings or his completely abstract work, there is kind of this middle finger. There's this kind of aggressive, like antagonistic feeling about his paintings. And I kind of hate them, but they're also kind of relief. I kind of like, he's kind of one of those cast of characters that I really quite enjoy running into. Um, anyway, so I think there's value in all human beings, and everybody brings something different to the table, and sometimes something more aggressive and assertive and overwhelming and domineering is kind of a refreshing change of pace. Okay, enough of my musings on aggressive painting or whatever I was just talking about. Okay, let's do one more of these and then I'll be done for the day. It can be a short critique today. So this painting right here, notice that I have another painting here, and maybe is this perhaps the same painting, just a different section of it? Let's see. Let's go back to that one because I'm seeing kind of these similar red dots and yellow dots. No, no. Maybe it was done on the same day because I'm seeing similarly sized red dots and yellow dots. So kind of interesting to think of seeing these paintings and starting to um, see the same kind of visual vocabulary repeated. And there's these kind of patterns from composition to composition that we can start kind of appreciating and that start to become narrative elements in themselves. So this one I could do, but I wanted to go over to this one. This one is stronger than the others already, and I think it is stronger because these shapes that the artist is using are already. He's got larger shapes that fill more of the compositional space, so they feel like an obvious focal point or a way for us to enter in and know where we're headed. That he gives us more of an indication of what is of primary importance. So we have shapes that are big, and then we have a lot of noise and smaller marks that appear to be less important just because of scale, right? So there's more differentiation of size there that makes it clear what our primary focal points. He's put this big pink shape right in the center. It's more contrasty as this lighter pink next to these darker colors in the background. So in this one, I think this is already a stronger composition just because of for those reasons. A stronger focal point, stronger way to enter in the painting and then move around. And then there's also these large shapes that are off to the sides or medium-sized shapes. There's a nice line happening here with this blue down at the bottom. So there's more movement here. There's not as much kind of small, kind of this chaos of small marks and shapes. There's some more solid, larger shapes that help us move around and identify important parts or primary, secondary, tertiary focal points. There's these nice little red swooshes. So not a bad composition already. Let's go back to, oh man, that green. This green right here is just so sludgy. Yuck, but yuck in a good way. I don't think it's necessarily bad to have paintings that have a little bit of goo in there. This one has some potential. So we've got some nice these lines that are really active, kind of Pollocky types of lines that extend across the whole composition, and then this kind of more choppy chaos up there. Maybe if I were to take the crop tool, I could activate some of those, crop down and activate some of those lines. I don't think we need as much of that chaos up at the top. I find these lines down here more active, more engaging. So what if we start using some of those lines to and line them up with some of these. I use this rule of thirds grid just because it's there, it's easy, and it's something that I think quite a few of us are already familiar with. You wouldn't necessarily have to always use the rule of thirds. In fact, you probably don't want to always use the rule of thirds because it's so commonplace that it can kind of start to feel a little cliched, if I can use that in this context, that word in this context. But it is something that's easy to understand and easy for me to kind of use to make a point here. So this starts to feel more interesting. These lines, this swoop of high contrast white there becomes more meaningful when we crop out some of the other stuff. This kind of general thick line of paint right up here lines up with the third line, which becomes a stronger division. This strong vertical, this dark line right here, lines up with the right third, which is perhaps more interesting. This chaos of marks and paint up at the top kind of loses some of its dominance to these areas that are less kind of simpler and more continuous in the negative space in the background. And some of these saturated colors start to become more meaningful when that chaos of colors up at the top is less present. Anyway, so another example where maybe we could find a stronger composition within a composition. In this case, you can always cut a canvas up, even if it's stretched. Just cut it off the stretchers. Or if you're working on wood, it's easy enough to take it to the table saw or jigsaw and cut it down smaller. It's really not that hard to isolate stronger compositions within a work of art that you're working on, and have that be what you intended all along. It's part of the process. Okay. So I'm going to switch over here to my front camera. That is going to be it for today. If you want to be part of this critique, if you want me, it can be abstract work, it can be representational, no matter what the medium. I'd love to take a look. And again, the hope is that you'll send me images of work that you're currently working on, works in progress, or work that you've recently finished. I think there's an energy in looking at those work. We all, as artists, I think we are inspired to action by seeing what other people are currently working on. I think there's a lot of energy there to be shared, and invite you to participate. And I understand it can be overwhelming to participate or put your work up on the wall in front of people for critique, but I think it's a fantastic way to improve. And I try not to be vicious in my critiques. I try to only give feedback and critique that is productive or that I think will help you improve, or see ways that perhaps you can develop an image, give you new ideas. So check out the website, dabbleon.com, if you're interested in registering for my mixed media class. Again, today is the last day. Midnight tonight is the end of registration. I would love to have you join me. There's already a really great group forming in the class, and I'm just really excited. It's some friends that I've had in my classes before that I'm really excited to work with again. I would love to have you be part of that group. So check it out at dabbleon.com. And if you want to be part of a smaller critique group, I would love to form those. I would love to help facilitate those. If you're interested in that, go to dabbleon.com, and up at the top menu bar, there's a button that says Critique Groups, a short survey that you can fill out, and I'll be in contact with you in the near future. Would like to get those started because I think it's a fantastic tool and a way to keep us all making artwork. So get out there and make artwork. I hope you all have a fantastic day. And with that, I will end this live critique. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Bye.